Hi everyone, my name is Lisa, this is Kathleen, and today we'll be presenting our 2050 design for the City of Brisbane. So getting into the presentation agenda, I won't really go too into depth because it's similar to a lot of the other presentations that you'll see. But I just want to make a note that for our 2050 designs, we really will be summarizing them and not going too into depth for them, just for the sake of time. So an introduction to Brisbane. For those of you that don't know, it's actually the third largest city in Australia. It's the capital of Queensland, which is a province in the country. The climate there is subtropical, which means that they have a lot of cooling degree days every year, and that's something that we'll be addressing in our building design. They have a population of 1.1 million people in the Brisbane local government area, or the LGA, so the LGA is what we'll be referring to when we say Brisbane. So there is like a greater Brisbane area, but that's really out of the scope of our project. So this population is expected to grow by 45% in 2050. And currently they have a population density of about 1,000 people per kilometer squared, which compared to Atlanta and other cities, it is quite low. So it is quite a suburban city. So currently Brisbane's per capita emissions is 41.8 tons of CO2. And that's a really high number, we recognize, but this does include a lot of the agricultural, industrial, manufacturing emissions, which makes it higher than just residential and transportation. So the target for our city is to reduce the 2050 annual per capita emissions by 56% from 2017 levels.
So reviewing these currently existing plans, so one of the really big ones that really influenced our vision for 2050 and our plan was the Brisbane Clean, Green, Sustainable. So the City of Brisbane basically has a sustainable plan for it extended until 2031. We used the main principles for that and expanded that until 2050. In addition, the Brisbane City Plan, which is a land use plan that extends until 2026. And one of the really helpful things about this plan was the interactive mapping tool that was included behind it. And so this is an image of what was included. It helped us really get a vision of the city because we've never been there, and it really showed us how the city plans to expand. So for our vision for 2050, we really want to keep the clean, green, sustainable, and that kind of encompasses a lot of the waste, energy, and water going into the city, and we wanted to kind of preserve the natural existing system and minimize the human impacts to them. In addition, we kind of want to also focus a little bit on transportation, so we wanted to make it a very accessible and connected city. And so that includes providing safe, efficient, reliable, and fast travel for everyone in the city.
So going into our 2050 designs, first I'll be addressing the building components of it. So just to give you a little bit of context, in 2017, 70% of the existing dwellings in Brisbane were single detached homes. So it does have a very low density. It is quite a sprawl. So this is something that we're trying to address for 2050. So 40% of the new dwellings that we'll be constructing between 2017 and 2050 will be infill projects. So this is really trying to emphasize building up versus building out. So our design recommendations, which I'll be discussing later, will result in an 88% reduction in residential emissions. So we've really separated our design for buildings into two components. Firstly, by addressing design for new buildings, and secondly, for addressing retrofits for existing buildings. So for the design of the new buildings, we want to install solar hot water collectors in all of them. And this is something where you're using a renewable source of energy, which is solar power, to heat the space and the water in your home, which we all know takes a large portion of energy consumption in the residential sector. In addition, we'll be using energy efficient lighting, natural ventilation, and using optimum envelope designs to try to reduce passive heating. So the natural ventilation component I just want to touch upon because that's something for new buildings where you're trying to orient them based on the wind and solar to try to promote passive cooling, and that's something that in a subtropical climate is really important. So for the retrofits of existing buildings, it's pretty similar to construction of new buildings, but instead of having the natural ventilation component, which is difficult because you can't really reorient existing buildings, we want to be implementing reflective roofs, which is really painting the roofs a lighter color to try to promote passive cooling and decrease the solar gains, and as well as just implementing solar hot water collectors and trying to have a more optimal envelope.
So moving on to transportation in 2050. So we have like three main issues we kind of identified for Brisbane. One of them being congestion really coming from the fact that a lot of 42% of people working in Brisbane actually come from the surrounding LGAs. Another really big issue was just the lack of connectivity in the suburban region. So the inner city was really well connected to public transportation. However, it was kind of lacking outside of that. And lastly, this kind of led to most of the mode share within Brisbane to be heavily reliant on passenger vehicle. As you can see, Brisbane actually has 75% of people traveling through passenger vehicle. So for our design in 2050, what we plan to do is increase the mode share for public transportation by 30%. And this is kind of going to be done through the incorporation of Brisbane Metro, which is a light rail system, as well as Brisbane Cross River Rail, which is going to be a rail system. Both of these service really congested areas within the inner city that are kind of being serviced right now by bus. These bus systems that service there could be reallocated to the suburban neighborhoods and overall connecting the city together, integrating suburban and inner city. In addition to that, we want to promote 30% active transportation modes here. So to do this, right now the bike lane or the bike system within Brisbane is actually fragmented kind of based on neighborhood design, like by neighborhoods. So we kind of want to connect those systems as well. And lastly, just on a very micro level, promote really sustainable and walkable streets.
We're talking about the land use design. So Brisbane, as I mentioned earlier, has a density of around 1,000 people per square kilometer, and by 2050 we anticipate that this will be 1,400 persons per square kilometer. And this is really because of trying to build up on what's already existing instead of trying to build on green sites. So currently Brisbane's land area is 40% of it is used for natural conservation, and that's something that we want to maintain to 2060. In addition, we want to increase urban green space from 4% to 8%, and as I mentioned earlier, building more green or infills in the area. So right here is a map of the 2017 land uses in Brisbane. So we're really going to try to be building more of the infills around the center of the city, as you can see here. So this is showing you the breakdown of the types of dwellings. So the lighter colors show the low density neighborhoods, and the darker colors show obviously the higher density. So in the red is where we recommend building the infills in the city. So you can see that's really centered around the downtown core. And here's a map of the green spaces. The dark green is where there's already the natural conservation in the city, and the light green is where there's the urban spaces. So the little green squares right there is where we recommend building new urban spaces.
So moving into the neighborhood design, it's like keeping up with a lot of the planning principles for land use. However, to kind of get our point across, we're going to use the Pleasant Hill Church Indy as an example. So we chose this neighborhood because it was close to the inner city, so it has a mix of like low and high density housing. And our plan, and also we chose it because it already has green space, which is something we want to use as a model for all other neighborhoods. And so moving into 2050 land use, what we want to do is intensify really along the main street. So you can see the red in 2050 is centered along this main transportation route. In addition to that, we're expanding the bike lanes. So the green lines you see in the 2017 has been expanded in 2050. And in addition to that, we kind of want to make transit the priority. So in the street design, we converted the lanes that you saw in the other image. Basically, we're going to convert the two into a more bus rapid transit and to promote public transportation in that sense, but also expand and widen the streets and include bike lanes.
We're talking about the energy design. So what we're really trying to emphasize here is trying to increase the percentage of renewable sources. So currently in 2017 we're at 7%, and we want to get 60% renewable energy sources by 2050. And this seems like quite an ambitious goal, but given the potential for hydro in the city, it's more than achievable, we think. So as you can see in the pie chart on the left, that's for 2017, the majority of the energy sources from the city is from coal, and a lot of it is also from natural gas and oil. For 2050, we want to increase other renewables, which are solar, wind, biogas to 35%, and hydro to 25%, while decreasing coal. So again, as I mentioned earlier, hydro there's a lot of potential for it in the city. The city council has already identified thousands of potential sites for hydro storage, which is like 100 times the amount that you need to be renewable, like 100% renewable. So given that Brisbane is also a subtropical climate that receives a lot of sun, we want to be building more solar power plants as well as biogas plants. And this is something the city is already doing, where they're capturing gas from landfills and using it for heating.
Moving into water for 2050, we have three main strategies to kind of focus on stormwater waste and actual water consumption. So rain gardens, we kind of really want to implement those in the low-density residential homes. This will decrease the amount of stormwater runoff and increase infiltration. In addition, for high-density and medium-density homes, we want to incorporate rainwater capturing. So this would be used as gray water and reduce the overall consumption of potable water in these systems. And because Brisbane is a subtropical climate, it does receive a lot of rainfall. In addition, because of the expanding population growth, we need wastewater treatment facilities, and the infrastructure is not there. So we suggest a sustainable alternative, which would be hybrid constructed wetlands. And because Brisbane, 6% of its land use is actually already wetlands, this is kind of integrating into the existing system for Brisbane. So together, these strategies would reduce the overall water consumption by about 50%. So moving on to waste in 2050, Brisbane has a pretty good waste plan. However, we kind of targeted two things they could improve. So initially, like, residential waste is actually pretty high, and that's something they could reduce. So for that, we kind of want to use a waste reduction campaign, which has targeted messages to certain audiences to reduce their waste, household waste. And in addition, they don't have like organic waste collection, which is kind of surprising. And so we incorporate, we'd like to incorporate that into our 2050 design and send that into the composting facility rather than landfill. And together, these strategies would reduce overall waste production by 50% as well.
Looking at the comparison of 2017 versus 2050, we're looking here at per capita GHG emissions. So we managed to reduce it from 29.3 tons per capita to 9.1. So this is a 70% reduction, and our target was 56%. We definitely exceeded our target. So if you look at the bar graph, the top one is 2050, the bottom one is 2017. And it's really obvious that really where most of our reductions come from is the residential sector. And this is partially a combination of having a cleaner energy mix, as well as the designs that we have for our new buildings and existing buildings. Transportation, unfortunately, did increase a little bit, and that's just due to the increasing number of vehicles and population in the city. And then also waste and water decreased by 50%.
So looking at our urban metabolism diagram for 2017, we kind of went in with three major goals. So the first goal is going to be to reduce the household emissions for water, waste, and transport. And so that's our first, and that's to be reduced by 56%. Our second goal is to kind of reduce the overall consumption of water and production of waste on a household level. And lastly, we really want to kind of increase the amount of renewable sources that are used in the energy mix. So looking at what we achieved in 2050, we see we've definitely decreased GHGs coming from households by about 50%, and the total household water consumption and waste production has been reduced by 50%. And what's really significant is we've definitely increased the amount of renewable resources going into the energy mix, and that's something, it went from 480 to about 6,800. So thank you, perfect. And so how does this relate on a global scale? We tie it to the Sustainable Development Goal 11, and mainly three indicators in that goal. So 11.2 kind of relates to transportation. Because we've expanded the system into the suburban areas, we've definitely provided access for a lot more people. 11.3 kind of focuses more on urbanization, and because we expanded up rather than out, the ratio of land use to population has been decreased. And lastly, we focused on maintaining the cultural and natural heritage. So that's kind of on preserving what already existing in Brisbane. The 46% of green spaces, we've maintained that. We've also added to it, so we've kind of added like about 8% more green space.
So in conclusion, Brisbane's target was 56% reduction per capita, and our design managed to achieve a 70% reduction. So we definitely exceeded our target and Brisbane's target. However, looking beyond 2050, we think there's still definitely room for improvement. We could definitely explore the potential for 100% renewable. As I mentioned earlier, Brisbane has the potential for 100% renewable times 100, just based on how much hydro storage they have. And we also want to have more infill projects to densify the city further, and also potentially explore using electric vehicles.